here at Sun and Fun. I'm Dan Johnson. I'm talking with my old friend Brian Boucher here, who is the man behind the Super Petrel LS in the United States. Brian, you got some news recently that was pretty exciting for you. Tell me about it.
Yes, thank you, Dan, and it's just great to be here for Sun and Fun this year, the 40th anniversary, and it couldn't be any better because I was able to bring the aircraft here finally with an airworthiness certificate that said Special Light Sport Aircraft.
You got the whole thing now.
We're totally completely done, and this is LSA #1.
All right, we're sitting in front of the first Special Light Sport Aircraft, Super Petrel LS in the United States. And you've had some interest in this all along, but you kind of had to hold people off a little bit until you got that done. And it's companies in Brazil, so the FAA had to travel to Brazil to look things over. When did they do that?
They actually did that about 10 months ago. 3 people, 2 from Washington and 1 from Oklahoma, all traveled down to Brazil.
That was some tough duty, wasn't it?
Yeah, they had to fight over that one.
Those
but
poor FAA guys.
And they spent 4 days actually doing the inspection and doing all the requirements for the ASTM compliance. And I have to admit, Dan, it was a very good experience when they were down there, and even after they returned back to the United States and they sent us their findings. The whole process took maybe 6 months after that, and everything went very well.
So let's talk a little bit about how that works, because I've had some familiarity with these audits, not firsthand, but in talking to a number of people about it. When they come in, first of all, they're not the usual FAA guys that we all think about that's there to give you a hard time, but they are going to look very carefully, aren't they?
Yes, they are. In fact, the airplane was not disassembled, it was a flying aircraft, but they had all the panels, all the covers off, so they could pretty much look at everything you'd need to look at when you're doing a condition inspection. And of course, they focus in the areas of safety like a mechanic would do, or a light sport repair maintenance engineer. And they're looking at placards, markings, and all the hardware, make sure the hardware is ASTM compliant.
Yeah, so when they do that, a lot of that is paperwork based because they can't see inside the airplane. They have no way to know how it flies. They don't fly the airplane, and they don't do some things like that. What they do is look very, very carefully at all the paperwork. They want to know how you tested it, how you recorded the test, how you kept track of all of that. But then, inevitably, they're going to find a few things that aren't quite to their satisfaction. Is that right?
Yes, and in our case, too, there was some issues with placards, and it was pretty much a Portuguese to English translation.
I see, sure.
So we corrected those. There was a few issues with the POH handbook that had to be, again, English translations. And also with the weight and balance. The weight and balance, we needed to work on the weight and balance to make it more user-friendly for the buyer up here in the US of A.
So that they can actually go through and fill out their form correctly.
Yes, it was a little bit difficult for them there, but we corrected all that. We had, I think, in the order of 15 to 20 findings, just paperwork findings pretty much, and we did change.
So then you go tick down the list and you take finding number 1 and you go fix it. Is that the idea?
Exactly, we fix it and then we send it off to them, and they agree to it or they don't agree to it, or they send us back a letter saying we want you to change it to this or correct it to this, until we're all happy. And
so it's a bit of give and take then after that initial inspection on site.
Yes.
To go through everything and make sure it's to their satisfaction. And then you heard that, this was a couple of months ago, you heard that, yep, things were looking good, but you still weren't quite ready because you had to have a man again come out, this time in the United States, and he did that fairly recently, and you got your clean bill of health.
That's right. So we have the folks from Washington and Oklahoma. They went down to Brazil. They found some findings, and then we corrected the findings, and once that was all completed, they sent us a letter from Washington saying that they were satisfied. And then the next step was to make contact with the MIDO office, that's the Manufacturer Import District office, which was located right here in Orlando, Florida. Made contact with them, and they quickly, together, both of us organized a time where 2 of their safety inspectors came out to have that final look at the aircraft.
So there's a lot of folks, Brian, that hear oh, well, these airplanes meet some standard, and the industry wrote the standard, and nobody looks at them that carefully, and it's not that big a deal. If you really want a proper airplane, you got to get a fully certified airplane. But the truth of the matter is, they look pretty close at this stuff, didn't they?
They sure did. In fact, you know, the gentleman that came from Oklahoma, he knows airplanes extremely well, and he looked over this aircraft very, very closely and was quite happy with what he saw.
So it's quite an accomplishment. Kudos to the folks at Edra Aeronautica in Brazil, where this all happens. But I'm guessing they were very happy to have someone as knowledgeable as you and who has a command of the language that they wanted in English to assist the effort. Did you go down to Brazil as well to do that, Brian?
Yes, I was actually with them, picked them up, met them at the airport in Sao Paulo, and then we all drove over and pretty much did the inspection together. While they were looking at the documentation that's required, I actually went flying with their chief pilot and became familiar with the aircraft. So I was able to fly 4 or 5 hours and really put the aircraft through its pace. So it made me feel comfortable to come back to the United States and pass on what they taught me down there at the factory.
Cool. So, well, that's a great segue, Brian. Let's talk a little bit about how this guy flies. Some people look at it and kind of go, gee, a seaplane with a bi-wing configuration. That seems like old and new stuck together, but it seems to work. Tell me more.
Well, it does work. In fact, we're not the first ones to have a biplane. In fact, the Beechcraft stagger wing, when I was a kid growing up in Canada, there was a Shell Canada had a Beechcraft stagger wing.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
A beautiful airplane. I never did have an opportunity to fly, but they said they loved flying the aircraft. So it was a new experience for myself, but I find the aircraft is extremely stable in the air, especially with there's some daytime heating, some conductivity coming up. It doesn't seem to want to bounce around as much as a normal wing.
Well, it benefits a little bit from a relatively short span, but having a lot of wing area thanks to having 2 wings. I mean, what is the span of the upper wing is the longer wing I can see as I'm looking out here toward it. Looks like about 3 feet more span perhaps on the upper wing than the lower wing.
Exactly.
But what is the span?
Just under 10 meters or 29 feet.
Okay, so that's a pretty short wing, which helps with that in-flight stability, but how does it work on the water, and especially with the low wing and the sponson, you may be able to see in the camera's view of the other side there, is right at the bottom of the wing. So how does all that work in the water?
Actually, you know, the wing sits low into the water, but the sponson keeps it out of the water, and every now and then if it's choppy water, we'll get a little bit of water come over top of the wing, but
is that any issue?
Not at all. It just kind of is like a big sponson, if you want to call it that, because the top wing is actually, you know, still sitting high above the water line, and during landing and takeoff, it's actually flying, and it'll stall after the bottom wing actually
I see.
stalls.
Okay, so there are slightly different angles of incidence.
And that's what we've done. Different angles of attack on that, and different angles of incidence on the lower wing too.
Okay, all right. So it's a stable machine in the water, but let's talk about the actual water operation now. Not the flying part, but once it slows down enough, it becomes a boat. And how is it?
And actually, this is where this hull, they've done a lot of engineering on this hull. As you know, this aircraft is over 20 years old. It's been around for some time, starting off back in France, and then Rodrigo brought it back, part of his thesis when he was working on his aeronautical engineering degree. And he totally redesigned the hull, looked at the wing, and redesigned the wing, changed a bit of the airfoil. The tips, as you can see, they kind of flare out, much like you see on the 787 on the Airbus 350 now. So, he's cutting edge when it comes to that. And then he worked on the hull. He looked at different hulls out there with Sea-Doos and all the other boats out there on the lakes. And he looked at what he had, and he made some changes to it. So now when you're on the water, you're like a Sea-Doo. You can fly this thing and taxi this thing all over the lake doing 45, 50 miles per hour.
Is that right?
And the only thing you got to watch is if you hit someone else's wake, you're going to go flying. If you got the speed too
at
high.
that speed, yes,
at that
right.
speed.
Yeah,
But
you're
otherwise,
practically at flying speed now.
yeah.
Well, yeah, that's a lot of great information, Brian. Congratulations again on getting that approval and line up some of those buyers that have been talking to you and get some Super Petrels in the air here in the U.S. Where can we go to get more information on the web? We'll put it up on the screen for folks, so just give us the word.
The best website to go to is the manufacturer's website. We're always trying to keep all the latest pictures and all the latest safety bulletins up there, and that's Edra Aeronautica.com. If you go to mine, FloridaLightsportAviation.com, it just takes you, the bullet takes you to theirs. We don't want two separate websites. Everything's current on their website, along with the current YouTube videos. If you go to YouTube and just search Super Petrel LS, you'll see up to 50 different videos of the aircraft flying.
One of them which is going to be with Brian Boucher here, I think, here at Sun and Fun. Thanks a lot, Brian, for all that great information, and Edra Aeronautica for developing this airplane down in Brazil. An effort of both aerodynamics and hydrodynamics, I think. And we are going to wrap it up here by just saying you can get lots more about the Super Petrel and lots of other aircraft and lots of other videos on bydanjohnson.com or bydanjohnson.com. Thanks so much for joining Brian Boucher and myself here at Sun and Fun.